Hello, my name's Jeremy Fultz with Red Stick Warrior TV. Today we are privileged to have a guest, Miss Bertha Tilkens. Bertha, thanks for joining us.
I'm glad to be here. Bertha Tilkens sa hojifkadon. Amiligida nutalsadon. Amidalwat talahasok tuas. Momen Norman Legedund aftuas. My name is Bertha Tilkens. I belong to the Alligator Clan. My band is Tallahassee, and I live in Norman. And I'm glad to be here today to let people know where I came from and what I have learned in my life's journey.
So why don't we go ahead and start there, Bertha? Why don't you tell us where you grew up at, where you were born?
I grew up in northern Seminole County, and I went to Little School. That was the name of the school I started. And when I started the school, I did not speak a bit of English. So I had difficulty the first 3 years of my schooling, and I don't even know how I got through the first 3 years because it was hard. It was difficult for me because I never heard English at home. I was raised by my grandmothers, and my grandmothers always talked to me in Indian, so that's all I knew. And so when I got to school, it was rather difficult, but I finally made up my mind I will learn this because my parents and my grandmothers told me, you need to learn because this is a life you will be living in as you get older. So I made up my mind I would do that, and on my life's journey, well, I finally learned it, and it wasn't until I was in high school that I really got to the point where I was saying to the other students, hey, I'm an Indian, I can't help that. But the same God that created me created you, and the color of my blood is the same, and I can't help it if my skin happens to be a little bit darker than yours. But I'm as good as you in any day of the week. So I just got braver as time went along because I was picking up things, I was learning things. And I always tell my kids, watch. You learn a whole lot more. Don't open your mouth until you're sure of what you're going to say. Because I've learned that if you just watch people, you'll learn a lot more about them and you'll learn how to handle them. But if you just get on the other side, well, then you're not going to learn or pick up anything in life. So that's the way I grew up. That's how I learned to live this.
So I'm going to throw a curveball at you. I know we kind of talked about maybe some questions that I was going to ask you, but just to kind of put where you grew up and the time that you grew up in perspective, what was some of the things that was going on in the country at that time? Like maybe who was president? Was there anything that was going on that you remember like this is a major event in my life?
Roosevelt was president at that time, and we had what we called ration cards. You were given a little booklet, and you could only buy so many pounds of flour, so many pounds of sugar. You were limited on how much coffee you could buy, and you were limited as to how much gas you could get at that time, and those coupons were what you used. And a lot of people who didn't have cars would sell to people who had cars or trade. They traded these coupons so that they could have what they needed.
Kind of like food stamps.
Kind of like food stamps are today.
Okay.
So I remember that because I remember, and we didn't have a car, so we always walked to the store. And it was about 2 miles away, and we always had to cross a meadow, and there was an old bull in there that was just ornery as all get out. And we'd always look to make sure where he was before we'd cross the meadow. And one time we looked around, we didn't see him, so we started to cross, but boy, did we get back under that fence quick. But I mean, those are kind of things that happened to me, but those were just kind of, I think, a lot of my learning process as I was growing up. And And I grew up in a Christian background. My grandmother was a Methodist, and she was a member of the Hijidi Methodist Church. And my other grandmother was a Baptist, and she belonged to Bird Creek in near between Kanawha and Sasakwa. So in the summer months, I was back and forth. So I had the benefit of learning Christianity, and then my mother's dad was purely traditional, and I would spend summers with him sometimes, and he took me to stomp grounds today that are no longer in existence, but I was fortunate in the way that I was brought up because I was exposed to a whole lot more than a lot of our kids are exposed to a lot, but it's a whole different thing when I was growing up because we didn't have everything that the kids have to face today, but we still had our problems. So I felt lucky that I was brought up by grandparents who were strict, and I just learned how to deal with different things in life that came along.
You said your grandpa took you to, several ceremonial grounds that are no longer in existence. I'm assuming those were Seminole grounds, or both Seminole and Creek grounds, or?
They were all, a couple of them were located in Seminole. Miccosukee was a Seminole ground, and it was what they call the mother ground, which is no longer in existence today. The only Seminole ground we have today is Chiaha, but back then there were several, and I can't remember them all, but somewhere in all my paperwork I do have a list of what grounds existed in Seminole County and back then. But I do remember going to several different grounds, like I say, that are no longer in existence today. And Tallahassee is one that was close to 5 miles south of Wewoka that my grandfather camped at. And I remember the first year that I was out there that I was only 14, and my grandfather didn't have a cook. I didn't know how to cook a whole lot, but I learned fast. I mean, I fed a whole camp, and I thought, oh my God. I said, no wonder I'm so tired.
So being a new cook at the ceremony ground, what was some of the things that you cooked?
I cooked boiled meat, I cooked rice, I cooked beans, and a lady was helping me, so she fixed the bread. She knew how to do that, so I didn't fix the bread, but I just fixed I didn't fix any sake or anything because I didn't know how to do that until later in life.
Yeah.
But later on, well, then my grandfather was able to get somebody, an older woman, to come in and cook. But that was kind of like a quick thing. It just happened. So I thought, boy, I got thrown into the fire real quick.
Made it work, huh?
Yeah, I made it work. I made it work. I said, there have been several incidents in my life that I've been kind of felt like I was just at my wit's end to do something, but, well, I can do this. I mean, just take your time and watch. And I've always told my kids, I said, watch other people, you learn.
Yeah. And
that's how I learned, was by watching my grandparents do things like making sake and making blue bread and things like that. I watched and I used to have to milk the cow, which I didn't really care to do, but I did. I mean, that was my chore.
Yeah.
Milk the cow, draw the water, and just things that kids nowadays have no inkling of how it was back then because they've never really been exposed to any of it.
What were some of the chores growing up? I know probably you and your siblings shared probably those roles. What were some of the chores that you guys had to do on a daily and weekly basis?
Feed the chickens, slop the hogs, milk the cow, bring the wood in, make sure that the lamps had plenty of oil in them so that you'd have lights. We didn't have the little switches that back then.
Yeah.
I mean, we had switches, but they were used for different purposes. So, I mean, those were some of the things. It was done daily.
Yeah.
And they were done, I mean, these were things you did before and after school. So
like, what time would you guys wake up to start your chores?
we'd start probably around 6, what I'd call, as the sun was coming up. Because you had to get those done and then get ready for school, eat breakfast and get ready for school.
And then about what time would you guys end up turning in for the night?
We turned in early. I'd always say when the sun went down, it was bedtime.
Okay.
Because we didn't have TV, we didn't have radio, you didn't have all this other stuff. So as the sun went down, you went to bed. And sometimes we got too ornery. Well, it was my brother and I. Well, Grandma would tell us stories. And there were stories that all elders back then would tell young children. And there was always a moral to the story. And at that time, I really didn't catch them. But today, when I think back and think of those stories, then I know what they were trying to do was teach me things that they had learned. Yeah. But some of those stories are pretty cute, but some of them are like, we always heard the stories about the rabbit, and he was always getting in trouble. And I think mainly because they told us those stories because we were always in trouble for some reason or other because we forgot to do a chore or we forgot to do something. But I think it was a teaching tool that they used. We didn't look at it as a teaching tool, but today I do. Mm-hmm. I do today when I look back and think, well, it was. They were just trying to teach me.
Well, to pick back up where we were just talking about how the elders, like your grandparents, would share stories with you guys towards, I guess, the end of the day. Mm-hmm. Do you think that TV and radio now kind of took away from that time to learn some of those stories?
I think so, because a lot of our Indian kids nowadays don't have the connection that I had with my parents or my grandparents, mainly my grandparents. And I see that the family connection is no longer there anymore like it used to be, because everything growing up we did as a family in a ceremonial ground, and wherever we went, it was family oriented. Even though some of the activities today are family oriented, I just see kids that aren't really interested in doing some of these things that their parents want them to do. So we've just lost some of our values, I believe.
And so let's kind of move forward with, I know you've given talks to several groups of people. Why don't you kind of tell us a little bit about some of the stuff that you've done with like the OU Law Center and some of the health professional side?
With the OU Law Center, they just wanted to kind of get a background. Well, let's just put it, all of the groups I work with, the OU Health Sciences Center and the OU Law School, they just wanted to have a background as to how to deal with our Indian people. And because I told them, I said, you just used one word wrong and they've closed the door. You're not getting your foot in that door, and you're not going to be teaching them anything. So these are the kind of words that you don't use in front of them. Like if you're a medical doctor, practice is a word you're used to. You use it every day. But our people aren't like that. You say practice on them, and they already think you're practicing on them anyway. So please don't use that word. Yeah. And just several little words that I could think of that would just turn our people off to where they would not listen to what was being said, what would be for their own good. So were just kind of some of the talks I've made to different groups. And then I also work with children, and when I work with children, it's a different thing that I talk to them about. I tell them little stories, and then I'll ask them, what was the story about? What did you get out of it? You tell me. So these are just, I love doing things like that because it's a teaching in a way.
And to fast forward a little bit, you've had some interaction with like Seminole Nation royalty and princesses. Kind of tell us the role that you've had there.
Well, I first became interested after my mother passed away. I found out that I had time on my hands, and every day I look to our Creator and say, thank you for giving me another day. That's always been my way of living. I mean, I don't go to church, but that's me. And that's between me and my Maker anyway. So that one day, I didn't really know what I was going to be doing because I had just recently lost my mother, and I'd been taking care of her for 5 years. And I thought, now what do I do? And I always say, God will show you the way. Well, all of a sudden, here was this Seminole paper, and it said they were doing their princess program. They were sending out applications for royalty. And I thought, hey, I can do this. That'll be just for my mother. And so I filled out the application, and in that application you also have to have 3 letters of recommendation, and I got all of those, and I got everything in, and I thought, well, here goes. And I never really thought any more about it, but in it you have to have a talent. So I told a story about an Indian story that was told to me a long time ago, and it was about the turtle and how he got his stripes. So I told that story, and I told it in Indian, and then I told it in English, and that's how I got involved when I first, and I won my title. So I was a senior princess for a year, and after that, no one told me that after you've held a title, you have to be on the committee for at least 1 term. Oh. Nobody told me that. Well, I ended up on 3 terms, so I finally said enough's enough, so I resigned just recently.
Oh. Well, I didn't ask you about this, but you mentioned the story about the turtle. Do you mind sharing that with us?
Mm-hmm. You want it all in Indian, or do you want it both ways?
Let's do both ways.
Okay. First, I'll tell it in English.
Okay.
Once there was this turtle, and he was hungry, and he saw these 3 women they were working with corn. They were chopping it up, and they were working with the Kijabi and Kijil, and they were grinding their corn. And so he crawls up there, and he was trying to get something to eat, and the women said, "Get out of here, you're in the way," and they kicked him away. And after the 3rd time that they kicked him away and he came back, well, one of the women took the pounder and just beat that poor turtle until he was nothing. And so he started barely crawling away, and he says, "Oh, I'm hurt so bad, I'm not going to make it." But he kept crawling away, and then he comes to this log, and he says, "How am I going to get over this log? I'm all beat up. I can't move, hardly move. I just don't know how. I'll just have to lay here and die." And he laid there, and all of a sudden he heard this voice that told him that if he sung this song 4 times, then he would be okay. So he sat and listened, and he heard the song, and he decided, okay, I'll try it. So as he was sitting there singing the song, he could feel his body going back together. And he thought, oh, this was God talking to me. And so he felt like, well, the Creator put me back together so I can accomplish what I need to do. So we have to look to our Creator in that way.
Yeah.
Lutzadala dis moidon achtung, illoidon, humbiden hubun achtuan, nagin hijigudan, alles an hochtagit de tint, aji hujagit sabalit, dimbonahu da bil hundsab mahan, boldoin hijit, atlim wilakin, lulan, aji abaladagan humtuan, ahan, direct away hookin. Had lekit I lúlan a dan afgachted a wicked away hooking. Sadut China lúlad mujadat Chidako se hahuin in Nukke Hudson walk it was at it a hit a whistly dyers on idut a walk in heated. Don't we look up Kahanduaya going to get legs on. Hayata ihayut lik salahana tegi skuasan ayak hangat ehen imbonahu imbuhit hayuit yehegi chinat chindagi hagi bahliske hotsen ini hehurat zadosuksu zadolele zadosuksu zadolele ustan ha yehegi chinuat Chindagi hagi balhiske hotsen legesa muy chakits to huigesa kundagi legesan and yeheg legesan yehegi ayan idan inadat to dilegin kisle and owen owesan and die in tileken in heliakit muy dan Chahaya di dat sakestukkiga and healy haktus market ayedis.
Thank you.
So that's how the turtle got the stripes on his back. I forgot to add that. So
Well,
when you said striped turtle, that's why he had beaten up so bad that God helped him get back together again.
Thank you so much for sharing that story. Bertha has had the opportunity to share her experience and a lot of our language in a book that she helped write called Beginning Creek. Bertha, why don't you tell us a little bit about your book? And I know your mom played a big role in it as well.
Well, when we first started talking about writing a book, it was because when they started teaching Seminole Creek at OU, they didn't have a textbook. They just had bits and pieces of paper that they wrote things on that they wanted to teach the class, and they made their class sketch or lessons from these loose leaf papers. And so after I guess it was their third year into their teaching, Pam said, I have to write a book. Why don't we focus on writing a book, a textbook? So she said, I will do the English part of it and then write some of the things that I need to go into the book, and then you two can help me with the Seminole part of it.
And that's talking about your mom. You and your mom can
Me
help
and
with
my
it.
mom.
Yeah.
My mother and I, Linda Alexander and I. So that's what we did. Pam would write the English, and then she'd send us pages, and we'd look at it, and then we'd give her the Indian version of it, and then she'd put it together, and then we'd, I mean, it was back and forth, because she was at OU when we first started. Then she moved to University of Wyoming in Cheyenne, so she was living there, so it was just like back and forth. And then once a week, for a long time, once a week she would call me to translate things for her. So that's how we did this, was she would write the English, and then she'd send it to us, and then we'd write the English. I mean, the Seminole Creek version of it. Mm-hmm. And then after she did a finished chapter, then she would send it back to us, and we would read it to make sure everything was correct. And if it wasn't, we'd do the corrections and then send it back to her. Mm-hmm. And the stories that were in there, we decided we'd add stories, little stories of different things. And I wrote most of the stories. I mean, just nothing, I gave nothing away from the ceremonial ground part of it, but just enough to let them know these things do exist. These things is what they mean to us.
Yeah. And there's 2 books, right? There's the Beginning Creek and then
Intermediate Creek, because at that time they were only getting 2 sessions or 2 semesters or 2 years of Seminole Creek. So we wrote the Beginning and the Intermediate Creek.
Yeah. And so with the books, I'm assuming that you have a preference on how people would learn Creek or Muskogee or Seminole, or Creek and Seminole. What's your preferred teaching method?
I prefer to go ahead and say the words to them and write them on the board, or give them pieces of paper that has it on them. Mm-hmm. And I know one year what I did was, after we learned some words, then I bought pictures or things, items. Like if it was a color, maybe I bought a red ribbon and said, okay, what color is this? You tell me in Seminole what color this is. Or if it was an animal, you tell me in Seminole. And that's how I made them learn how to say some of their words, or basic words.
And so again,
because I think that when you're teaching, if you have something that shows them what it is and how you do it and explain to them, it sticks with them more than just say it and walk away.
And again, there's 2 books that Bertha has written along with her mom, and then Pam Ennis, Beginning Creek, and then also Intermediate Creek. And you can find those on Amazon. And if you Google the book titles, you'll definitely run across a lot of the different copies. Well, Bertha, we usually try to give our guests time just to share maybe a story or share one thing that maybe for the newer generation of our people and our tribal citizens, maybe just something that you would like to share with them or leave with them as we end our interview. Is there anything that you would like to share with our audience?
Yes.
Feel free.
Always be proud that you're an Indian, whether you're Seminole or Creek. God created us, and God created every man that walks this earth. He gave us certain talents, and we all have them. We just need to improve on them, and never let anybody put you down because you're an Indian, because you can make your life what you want it to be.
Right. Well, again, thank you so much for watching Red Stick Warrior TV. Look at our website and our Facebook pages. And again, Bertha, thank you so much for joining us today. I learned so much and I appreciate it.
Well, I appreciated doing it. I'm always glad to impart some of my knowledge that I've gained over the years.
Thank you so much.